How are you? I am Jessica Strand, the Senior Director of Programs and Strategic Engagement, the Library Foundation of Los Angeles. We are in the middle of a great spring. I'm talking loudly, and it's the middle of a great spring, and tonight we continue with two wonderful writers, Karen Russell and Jason Leone. Let's not. Come May, we welcome Deborah Archer of the ACLU. She's the national president, Cheech Marin, Jonathan Ames, and Ocean Vong. To find out more about our programs, please go to lfla.allowed.org. For those not familiar with the Library Foundation of Los Angeles, we are a private, nonprofit organization devoted to advocacy, fundraising, and innovative programming in support of the Los Angeles Public Library. And speaking about advocacy, this is National Library Week, and today is Take Action for Libraries Day. I know many of us are disheartened and concerned about the ongoing threats to education, freedom of expression, and libraries. Our libraries represent the best of our ideals, welcoming all and providing free access to information and services that enrich, educate, and empower. But a recent executive order threatens the Institute for Museum and Library Services, the IMLS, the only federal agency that supports libraries nationwide, including here in Los Angeles. IMLS funded grants enhance the Los Angeles Public Library's programs that improve mental, physical wellness for older adults, expand sensory-friendly spaces for neurodiverse youth, and promotes play-based early literacy in Los Angeles. You can make a difference to help protect libraries. Call or write your representatives and urge them to oppose the recent executive order that threatens IMLS funding. Thank you to all those in the audience and Library Foundation supporters and members who are here. If you are not yet a member or supporter, I hope you will consider supporting the Library Foundation to see more programs like this one and to increase critical access to information, resources, and technology to help Angelenos improve their lives and fulfill their dreams. This is a crucial time to support nonprofits whose mission you believe in. You can support us with a donation by, look right over there, it's so easy. We would be very grateful. I'd also like to thank our sponsors, Errant Fox Schiff, Deloitte, the Golden Globe Foundation, Steve and Judith Krantz Foundation, the Los Angeles County Department of Arts and Culture, the National Endowment for the Humanities, Sharon Oxborough Endowed Fund for Allowed, Peck Endowment for Cultural Programs, Ralph Parsons Foundation, and of course, all individual foundation donors and members. Now, for tonight's exciting program. I rarely become a pusher of a book. I recommend or suggest books to friends when asked, but in the case of The Antidote, I was so taken with its beauty, whimsy, haunting, and imaginative text that I couldn't help but add it to every conversation I was having while I was reading it. I looked for the opportunity to read a passage or a line, and to praise its unflinching capacity to be both a historical fiction and a book that deals with the pressing issues of our present and future. So before I go on, I need to read a few sentences from its prologue to give those who haven't read it a taste. Quote, "The town was gathered to solve the problem of the rabbits, who chew through rangeland and cropland, who eat the golden wheat your papa turns into money. Worse than locusts, says papa. Every hide brings a penny bounty. So many turnipy, sweaty bodies and a festive feeling in the air like a penny rub between two fingers, like blood shocked into a socket, a smell that reminds you of a room where babies are born. This layered novel, with an ample cast of compelling characters, including the prairie witch, otherwise known as the Antidote, is set in Nebraska in the fictional town of Uz, framed by two weather catastrophes, the Black Sunday dust storm of 1935 and the Republican River flood, which came a month later and dropped 24 inches of rain. There is so much here to discuss about humanity, the erasure of people, the promise of plenty to others, turning soil into cash, and the devastation that natural disasters have not only on the land, but on the lives dependent on that land. Karen Russell is the author of 6 works of fiction, including the New York Times bestseller Swamplandia and Vampires in the Lemon Grove. She received a MacArthur and a Guggenheim Fellowship. She has also been a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize. She's received 2 National Magazine Awards for fiction, the Shirley Jackson Award, and 2023, the Botteri Latte Granzone Prize, and in 2024, Mary McCarthy Award. She'll be in conversation with Jason DeLeon, who is a professor of anthropology and Chicano studies and the director of the Costin Institute of Archaeology at the University of California, Los Angeles. He is also the executive director of the Undocumented Migration Project, a collective that seeks to raise awareness about migration issues globally while also assisting families of missing migrants reunite with their loved ones. He is a MacArthur Fellow and the author of the award-winning book, The Land of Open Graves, Living and Dying on the Migrant Trail. Please welcome Carol Russell and Jason DeLeon. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming out on a weeknight. It's nice to see you here. Thank you, Jason, who is bravely giving up a Little League game to be here with us. I know.
We're 0-7, but we are winning right now, I was just told.
Yeah.
So maybe it's good. I'm a good luck charm from a distance. So
Yeah. We'll keep people updated on the score.
I gave my oldest a rabbit's foot as I left, so hopefully that helps.
Yeah. I was just telling Jason my favorite review so far for this book that I wrote was, this book is both good and bad for cat lovers. It's bad for rabbits.
Well, I think I want to congratulate you on convincing these fine folks to give us microphones and cut us loose. So I'm just always so thrilled to be in conversation with you, which usually just involves a lot of laughing. So
yeah, similarly. And it's a tricky thing. I mean, this book takes on some really serious topics, and I think one anxiety I had about talking with Jason, who's one of the people that I most admire, but also someone who I only ever want to laugh with, is like figuring out, I'm like, tonally, this will be an interesting needle to thread. I know we can do it.
Yeah.
But if we are joking, just please know, like, it certainly doesn't mean that I don't take the subject matter of this novel seriously. And that was a challenge writing the book too, I think, was trying to find, the tone of it.
Yeah.
Jason and I both take a really long time to write our books, so that's something we have in common. But it's like very motivating to finish one, because then it's true. Like, I got to see you after Soldiers and Kings, which is, I'm sure some of you have read it, National Book Award winning masterpiece. And I was thinking too about kind of the relationships that you built and the trust that you built over time to write that book. And this one, The Antidote, was interesting. It's different than other things I've written because I built friendships with real people. And it made kind of the responsibility feel a little bit different. I genuinely prefer to be like a self-deprecating bear on a unicycle, like in the world. And then with this particular book, I think just because people shared so generously with me about things, that are really hard. I mean, on the settler side, homesteaders who talk to me about, their grandparents coming through the Dust Bowl, or, leaving, escaping persecution in European nations to come to Nebraska. And then I traveled with my friend Dr. James Ridingen to the sites of genocide and ethnocide, federal Indian boarding schools, these places that were institutions where unspeakably cruel things happen to people. And so it's made it like, it's just, I don't know if you felt that way when you were kind of touring Soldiers and Kings. It's interesting because these gifts were so profound, and trying to figure out how to honor them, speaking about it publicly it's been interesting. It's a little bit different than writing like short stories about werewolves.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's such a beautiful book, and I think what it really does in a lot of ways is it zooms in and out. It travels through time, and I think one of the real strengths of it is that it gives you this really kind of nuanced and complicated view on such difficult subject matter, which I think we all kind of know as humans that that like life is full of sorrow, of joy, and it can happen simultaneously. And I think that really does come across quite a bit in the book. And it's a book that makes you laugh out loud. It's a book that makes you cry. It does all those things, and I think for me that's really refreshing. And so that it's not this, it's not a doom and gloom. It's a story that has doom and gloom, but it's a story that has so much more. And I think it's much more reflective of the actual experiences of so many folks. And I love the ending, like when the author's note at the end, I think really speaks to that. And just we already know as readers when we get to the end, but I loved kind of hearing I read half of it and I listened to half of it, and so hearing your voice at the end with the author's note, I think really kind of ties it all together really nicely.
Oh, I'm so glad. I was just telling Jason, I haven't heard the audiobook yet. One of my relatives was like, I've been trying to listen and I keep falling asleep. I mean,
it's great. The audio is great. I think it's really great.
I'm like, thanks so much. Maybe that's a you problem. I'm like, check your sleep hygiene. And, I love doing both. Actually, I love reading and listening. It's a different art. I'm glad that you like the author's note. I think I never really know. With fiction, it's a little bit different. It was unusual for me. It's the first time I've tried something like that, and I worried slightly about it feeling like I don't know. Remember that Microsoft paperclip from the 90s that would be like, are you writing a letter? And you'd be like, shut up. I know what I'm about. But you don't want to feel like too bossy, or too much like a backseat driver. I think with this particular book, I really wanted there to be a bridge to other resources, I think I was sort of aware, no book can offer like a full 360. So this one was so much about the holes in people's, kind of the omissions in people's private life stories and trauma, right? And sort of the things that are sort of hard and do feel unspeakable sometimes. And wanting to trace a line between those kinds of distortions or forgettings that I think everybody's familiar with, right? Like, I don't think there's any family that passes down a full story of how they came to be where they are. But wanting to trace a line from that to a kind of mass denial or mass forgetting, or to think a little bit about how the Farm Securities Administration, and prior to that, the Resettlement Administration, I bet some of you are familiar with these photographs. And I was thinking a lot about how what I knew about the Dust Bowl was really curated in a way by this photographic archive. So some of our most famous photographers, Dorothea Lange and Walker Evans, later on Gordon Parks, who's like a big inspiration to me, who also says, to your point, the camera is not only a tool to document misery. So he's someone who's using his camera to really kind of show all kinds of, poverty, injustice, really extreme dissonances between the so-called American dream and how it's experienced by different groups of people. He has Ella Watson, who's a janitor in D.C. I'm sure many people know this photograph, where he takes a series of her life, and it's American Gothic. She's in front of the American flag. But yeah, just that idea that a camera also shows the fullness of whatever we are. But I thought there are these hole-punched images in the book. And I learned about that researching. There's kind of a shadow archive. So this gentleman, Roy Stryker, who is a complex figure, he helms this project. It's originally designed to introduce America to Americans, but it's also from the very beginning sort of tasked with creating propaganda for the New Deal and its programs, its aid programs, which are incredibly controversial during this period. So there's that tension from the beginning between a kind of documentary aim and making propaganda at a time where the Southern Democrats really control the purse strings of Congress. So there's an almost existential imperative to tell a certain kind of story. And so these hole-punched images, he had like a literal hole punch. And in the early days, he later abandons this practice because his photographers hate it, as we would hate it. I think that was a bridge for me. It was just like these like really testy correspondence between the photographers and their editor in Washington around the work they were making. But what's interesting is these negatives still exist and they're digitized. You all can go look at them on the Library of Congress. So it's like sort of, to me, that was interesting, right? Like this shadow archive of what isn't published, what isn't circulated, you know, what didn't make it into like kind of what substitutes for public memory of this period. And I've spent years now kind of thinking about the hole in the center of those photographs as sort of a ledger of loss, and also maybe kind of like a map to what could be recovered.
Well, it reminds me, I mean, you were the one that turned me on to Avery Gordon, right? And so thinking
she
about,
rules.
right? And so I feel like her spirit is in
sure.
different parts of this book, especially in the kind of layers of discussion that come around photography. But I wanted to ask you, and this is, you know, in Swamplandia, you're like the only fiction writer I know that I've seen, at least in many years, that name drops Margaret Mead. And if you don't know who Margaret Mead is, she was a very famous anthropologist who passed away in the late 70s, but was kind of a big deal in the 50s and in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. And so you name drop her in Swamplandia, and so much of your writing often feels to me anthropological, or, you know, there's like the snippets of ethnographic, and in this book it definitely feels like we have the archaeology, we have the ethnography, we have the ethnohistory, and I kind of wanted to know, like, where does that come from? I mean, and also, I mean, like, you literally, if you weren't doing this book, I think you would be doing archaeology or anthropology, because it's clear that you have an interest in all of these things, whether it's dendrochronology or, you know, or archaeology. It just shows up in so many wonderful kind of ways, and I wonder if you could talk a little bit about where that comes from.
Well, I'm a nerd, Jason.
Well, yeah.
I'm a nerd, see? I'm in my 40s and I'm not ashamed to tell you all. That's what I am. That's my short answer. No, I mean, I do. I find all of those disciplines super fascinating. I mean, I love in your incredible introduction to Soldiers and Kings that like part of the joy of anthropology is like hanging out with strangers, like really getting to know other consciousnesses, right, that are distinct from your own, and like thinking through a little bit too. I mean, I had this moment as a college student 1,000 years ago. I took a gender and society class. I genuinely had not thought about gender as a construct. I hadn't even really thought about like this notion that, oh, I should consider the context in which my own choices are made. It's possible to kind of like zoom out a little bit and like look at the lineage of these things. Like, I think history of science is a fascinating field, because it's like, well, wait a second, how did we get these metaphors for what we are? And what is that kind of like tightening feedback loop where we all now, like, when did it happen, right? That like, I don't know, one economic theory kind of permeates all disciplines, and now we think of ourselves as these kinds of agents driven by self-interest, right? We didn't always. So I think like storytelling is fascinating to me, and this really unique power we possess to sort of like modify our own understanding of whatever we are via the stories we tell. I heard somebody just the other day, I was in Nebraska, and they said, you know, the best way to get to know a person is to say, what stories did you grow up with? Not like, what are your beliefs or what are your politics, but like, what were the stories you were told as a kid, right? And I thought that was so interesting. And I think some of this book was interested also in like the life word stories versus the ones that sort of like keep us welded to some really unjust systems, right? Or some really kind of bankrupt notions of what it means to be a person or what success means. I think that's like a long answer, but I love, I wish I had like the skill set. I love science, right? Like I used to belong to this group, Neurite, where like writers would just like eat sandwiches near neuroscientists. And sometimes we would workshop their stuff. I do remember like this really sweet ichthyologist was like, it was so terrible. The writer was just sitting there paralyzed in silence while the others viciously tore their chapter apart. And I was like, that's called a workshop. I'm like, we love it. I'm like, it's helpful to us. So anyway, and it's funny because I feel like it's nice to talk to Jason about this. Like, you have such like a novelist eye and ear for kind of portraiture and dialogue. And one of the reasons I love Avery is because she's sort of such a disciplinary amphibian. And I wonder if you run into that a little bit. Like, I know Soldiers and Kings is a different kind of book in some ways than Land of the Open Graves. And it's kind of, I don't know, in its portraiture of like a place that generates sort of possibilities and impossibilities for the people there.
Well, it's funny, as an anthropologist and as a nonfiction writer, I got asked recently, like, they were like, we need a quote for this story. Like, tell us, like, why is it important to read nonfiction? And I went, I don't read nonfiction. Like, I don't read ethnography. I read novels. I read fiction. And I think part of it is because my discipline, I mean, it's all storytelling. We're just not very good, anthropologists are not very good storytellers. I think Margaret Mead was, but that's kind of gone out of fashion. And I think that we can learn so much from the novel. But I think this, I mean, I want to go back and read, I mean, as I was reading The Antidote and listening to it, it became clear to me that it is a novel that has these layers of ethnography, history, archaeology, kind of this post-colonial, this decolonial kind of analysis. And so it has all those kinds of things, and I love that. I think that that's what got me, I was unexpected. I mean, I sort of always expect like science to kind of be in there, but I think with this thing, it really was this wonderful combination of stuff. And I really think I want you to write nonfiction now. I'm like, man, you could. I mean, you are. I mean, you've drawn so much from these other disciplines. And I brought a couple things for you. I direct the Institute of Archaeology at UCLA, and oftentimes when faculty abandon their office, they leave all their shit in the hallway, and so you rifle through, and you're like, God, what am I gonna like? Nobody wants these books, but I found one yesterday.
You brought me your colleague's
I brought
trash.
Yes. So I don't know who this was, but this book is called Crimson Desert: Indian Wars of the American Southwest, and I was like, okay, and I read the little intro, and it says, this is a fair-minded account of this clash of civilizations between the red and the white. And it says there are good folks on both sides. And I was like, but I just felt like I brought this for you because I feel like you'll get a kick out of that. And I'm secretly hoping that you'll start writing some nonfiction.
Wow, there were good people on
Yeah,
both sides, of
right.
course. Wow. I mean, it's been really interesting with this book, too. I think there was one review that was like, I think criticizing the notion that there might have been people in the 1930s, like white Americans, who, were aware of kind of what we kind of now understand as American settler colonialism, like that this was wrong. And there were always people. I mean, that was so interesting to look at these newspaper articles and see, like, of course, there's a variation in how people are reporting on and understanding, right, the immiseration of their neighbors, right, or of, the original people of the plains. And so it's interesting too to sort of like encounter some of the ways. Like I'm sure anthropologists have like a different, some smarter word for that. What would you call it? Like a kind of presentism or something, or a sort of bias where it's like, well, we are at like the apex of this is, all prior people were somehow more backwards than we are, and we exist somehow, we stand athwart the, history. We are the most progressive, the most enlightened.
Well, this is why I love the Harpoletsky moment in the auditorium where he has this kind of awakening, and it's just a very uncomfortable moment for so many people. And that to me feels very real. I mean, it feels very much like this moment in a lot of ways. It's like folks are becoming aware that, right, this is a country founded on genocide, on all the isms, on so much brutality, and it's for some folks, they're just having this realization now. and it's not a popular one for certain audiences. And and the pushback and the confusion that it sows in this. I mean, this book feels very, very timely in many ways.
Yeah, I think it stirs up so much for people. And I hope, right? Like, I was really trying to have a stance of kind of curiosity instead of kind of condemnation, right? Like, just to like kind of look at like, well, the question of home and who owns the land. I mean, these are such, yeah, they vibrate inside all of us, right? Like, the question of home is like such a really fraught and potent one, like just on an animal level. I was thinking a lot, for those of you who have read Soldiers and Kings, the frameworks that shape the way we understand. Like, if you look at something like the Oregon Trail, I'm from Oregon, like there are all these markers, it's celebrated. It's like, look at these brave families coming west to give horizon light to their children. They sacrificed everything to make this gift to their children. And you can see that huge swaths of our population right now, right, cannot understand like migrants coming to our country in that they can't. And it's really sort of staggering, right? Or I think of like Ukraine and Palestine, right? Like just the blinders or the different ways that our understandings of reality are sort of sculpted by forces that I think like we're not always consciously aware of, right? I certainly wasn't, right, at different points in my life, like of some of the blinders I myself was wearing. So to give one example, like from the writing of this book, I loved Laura Ingalls Wilder as a kid. I loved the idea of like the dugout and the soddy as like, and I thought of it as sort of this quintessential symbol of like the pioneers. I was like, that's so amazing. Like, look how they were able to like have this kind of hobbit hole in the earth and survive the winter. And surviving the winter, like it was like in the way that this was taught to me was like people went to the moon or something, right? It was like, what an amazing feat. And not that it wasn't, right? But just that it's a different story if you're like other people's families flourished here in this place for millennia. It's a different story. It's a different story to reconnect. I mean, when I saw, my friend who I mentored, Dr. Riding, and showed me photos of these Pawnee earth lodges or mud lodges, which fit, like 50 or 60 people, and there's a whole cosmology built into them. There's a whole sort of, like astrological, a spirituality kind of in the structure of these mud lodges. And I was like, oh, of course, like the dugout is a settler adaptation of this much older architecture. But I'm like whatever age I am when I'm sort of, so I juxtapose them in the book with the hope that like people can really start to see, not just that connection, but also maybe some of like what has been omitted from a sort of collective, and not everybody, right? I mean, to Jason's point, like the gaps in my understanding are also like a mark of privilege, right? Like not everybody gets to forget those connections. And I think that, the kind of the waking up that's very uncomfortable right now, other people's entire lives, or there's no that's also a kind of strange luck or privilege.
Well, I'll
that
say
ignorance.
Even my own. I mean, after the election this year, I woke up in the morning and I was like, "How could this be?" And then I thought to myself, "Oh, remember that time you wrote a book about how the federal government kills migrants every day along the U.S.-Mexico border?" And I was like, "Oh yeah," and that's how it could be, because it's. I mean, but it's this. I think even like for someone who, I've been telling myself lately, like there's the America that I was taught and indoctrinated to believe in. There's the America that I've experienced and I've come to understand as a student of history, and then there's the America that I want it to be, right? And I think even when I know how things are, sometimes these awakenings are just like, oh my, like it's. I mean, I think everybody is having different kind of moments with it, and even those of us who should know. I mean, I should know better. I shouldn't be surprised, but of course I am.
I'm reading Omar Lakhad's amazing "One Day Everyone Will Have Always Be Against This." And I think there's so many conversations. I mean, just because I've been reading sort of some of the rhetoric used to justify, the dispossession of Native nations and their citizens on the plains, and truly horrific. That was my education too. I'm like, oh wow, so many heinous things are perfectly legal because these laws have been reimagined, right? And and sort of there. So I was just reading his book, and I think it really encodes the same kind of, yeah, exactly what you're saying. Like there's the ideal, and there's like the tremendous roaring gulf between these ideals and yeah, what we're living and what our history has been. I think during the Great Depression, you see that too. Like if you could have if there was some cartographer who could do like a map of where the aid flowed.
No.
Which is not to say that that the people that inspired the Jodes didn't suffer enormous losses and that they're suffering. I love The Grapes of Wrath. I think we both are big Steinbeck fans. I think that book was one of the first kind of adult novels I read, and it shaped me forever. But you would see kind of a map of white supremacy, right?
Yeah.
You would, if you looked at where the aid went.
Well, it's fine. Speaking of Grapes of Wrath, I've been having conversations with my collaborator Michael Wells about this, and he said, could you imagine if they redid The Grapes of Wrath but with Hondurans? Like, what would that reception be, right? Is that
exactly?
Does the story lose its kind of nobility now suddenly, right?
Right. Or with this book, I was thinking a lot about, the Resettlement Administration is designed originally to kind of move poor white tenant farmers off submarginal lands. So it's like a thought experiment, right? I'm like, what if that land had been returned to the people from whom it was stolen? Like, I think like the solutions have a lot to do with like how you diagnose the problem. And when I talk about the Dust Bowl to people, I think a lot of people still, the way it's taught in textbooks, the way I understood it before I sort of wrote this book was the proximate causes. So it's like there were these poor agricultural techniques, market forces, right? There's a depression. Prior to that, there's a wartime wheat boom. People are sort of overplowing, overplanting. We have this, this extractive capitalist ethos that says you have to turn soil into cash as quickly as possible. And greed is a big part of the story, but debt is also a huge part of the story. And people sort of uproot all of these native grasses that used to anchor the soil in place. And then it's blowing. Then you have these apocalyptic dust clouds that swallow the sun. It's really like something beyond what any fiction writer could imagine. But I didn't grow up connecting these federal land policies that, by design, take, the vast territories held in common often, right? Like this was like a real barrier to like our, to manifest destiny, to this notion of like private property and individual, right, this the Jeffersonian dream. But I mean, soil erosion was a problem that Jefferson tries to solve with manifest destiny. That's the solution. And that colonial model of occupying a spot and running it dry is still driving like a truly global soil erosion crisis today. So, I mean, I didn't know going into this that, soil's not very sexy also, unfortunately. Louise Erdrich has an amazing book called The Mighty Red that talks a lot about soil, and there's like a love triangle in it, and I was like, damn it. That was such a wise inclusion. It's a great book. You guys should all read it. How did I get way over here? Oh, right. You're thinking about in Jason's book, you really see that this is policy, right? And success is people deterred. It's sort of weaponizing the climate against migrants and sending people into this hostile terrain. And I was thinking too, it seems so dry, but these federal policies that result in the immiseration of really, like a loss that is just difficult to comprehend.
Well, I think one of the reasons this book feels very anthropological to me is because I like to joke that my discipline, we're very, very good at complicating things that are supposedly supposed to be very easy. Maybe people go how would you solve the migration crisis? And then I go, okay, well, stop late-stage capitalism, climate change, patriarchy, white supremacy, all the things. And I go, well, you can't put that on a campaign slogan. That's hard to that's a complicated platform. And I think what I love about this book is that, I was listening to it with my oldest in the car this week, and we were talking about the Dust Bowl, and he was like, well, what started it? What's the problem? And then by the end of listening to this book, he had questions about the cat, he had questions about the scarecrow, but also just we were tacking back and forth between conversations about environmental degradation and and misogyny and patriarchy and all these things. And I just love that we have all these layers in this book, and it's just done so brilliantly. And you have so many amazing characters who speak to these different things, but really presenting it in this very nuanced and complex way. But it doesn't feel heavy-handed. It's not overly complicated, but it is reflective of I think the complicated nature of these issues. And so I really want to congratulate you on that. It's very moving and insightful, and was a wonderful thing to dig into all week.
Thank you, my friend. I mean, it's true. I mean, people, radio interviewers a couple times have said, like, well, why did the soil start to blow? And then I think they really regret asking me that question a lot, because it is exactly what you're saying. It doesn't really fit on it's certainly not just poor agricultural practices. Yeah. I mean, it's like, this kind of winner-take-all extractive economy, but it's also these racist attitudes. It's a whole kind of nexus. And I think, too, there's this dream right now that, like, we're going to innovate our way with technological solutions out of our climate crisis. And I mean, even, like, reading about, I hope fusion does make clean energy, endlessly available. Even if it did, like, with the structures we have in place, with, like, with kind of late-stage capitalism, with kind of some of the ways that white supremacy still structures everything here. Like, can you imagine that it would be automatically, like, a more just world? I doubt it, I heard a really great interview recently with Ted Chiang, and it was about AI, right? And, like, all the kind of, like, dark speculative fiction that people are writing in all directions about AI. And he was so lucid. He was like, no, I don't think it's that people are afraid of technology. I think they understand how the technology is being engineered and the structures within, the funding structures. He's like, I think people are afraid of, like, the rapacity of, like, unchecked capitalism. No. And you can't decouple the technology from capitalism in that way.
And I just want to say one more thing before we turn it over to Q&A here. There's one of the moments I really love. I'm coming back to this scene towards the end when Harpo Lesky is talking about all of these problems and about giving the land back, and someone in the audience says, well, what about us? Like we can't just give it back. And then he says, well, okay, well, what if we sit down and talk about all of the different things that are kind of happening right now? Like that's a good place to start. And I do think that is such an important thing to put out there, because it's like, let's build a wall and that'll solve our problems. Or, we're going to get Greenland, as I saw this afternoon. So as soon as we have Greenland, problem solved. And really, I think it's this recognition that there are so many things to be thinking about simultaneously, and that's a very scary thing. Yeah. But also, I don't think we're going to move forward in any meaningful way until we start to think about how all these pieces fit together. And so that's one of my favorite moments in the book, because I feel like that's really reflective right now of this crisis of, people want easy answers. There is no easy answer, and the way forward seems to be acknowledging that there's a lot of things going on, and we have to kind of think about this as all part of this big ball of problems that have to be dealt with in that way.
Yeah, thank you so much. I mean, I feel that way too, and that's the daunting piece, right? It would be easier to be like, and the silver bullet is, like, there is no single antidote. Right? If you could, I mean, I think some people, even like some of the scientists I talked to who would point to soil and regenerative agriculture, I mean, this is amazing. There is so much potential, but without some kind of reordering of society, it will fail. I mean, I think that for me was the lesson of this research too, because you really see that you have this millennial ecosystem on the prairie, and then a grid falls on it of these imaginary lines that we all police with blood red force. Everyone is, I mean, these are not like wicked people, right? They're like you and I. And it's like the definition, the system that they're operating in is telling them to accumulate as much as they can in a narrow box for their direct descendants. And so quickly, there's like the living soil is like an eclipsing cloud of dust. And it's just, I mean, it's a horror story in a way, but I think it is very much what we're living now. I think a lot of people, because we're animals on the planet. My friend Mimi was like, yeah, our central nervous systems are responding to our awareness that this isn't tenable. And it's scary and daunting a little bit to try to imagine alternatives to business as usual. Yeah. But at least that, I mean, I felt like that felt powerful to me to kind of shift out of a stance of resignation to say, no, but we do have choices together.
Absolutely.
There's jokes in this book.
Yeah.
It's a pleasure too. It's a page turner. I was telling my friend Luis, I'm like, I'm so glad to be promoting a 400-page hardcover work of fiction right now. There's never been a better time, really,
Perfect time.
go around the country and just. People have a lot of leisure time. They're very relaxed.
Yes.
And they have a lot of disposable income right now today. So I'm glad that to celebrate this book launch with you.
When we all get deported back to other countries, we'll have a book to read.
Right.
It'll be those long flights. I'm trying to figure out where they're going to send me. No, but congratulations. I think it's really
Thank you,
it's a really
Jason.
wonderful book.
Thank you.
I think we have a little bit of time for some Q&A.
We do. We're going to have Q&A. But will you read a little bit?
Oh, for sure.
Okay.
But I'm going to read a
from this
part
one,
that's
though.
not. Yeah, right. From Odie Frank.
Read a funny part.
His fair-minded presentation. I will, but this is what I'm going to read is not funny. I'm sorry, guys. There are like at least 3 jokes in the middle. If you don't find 3 jokes in this book, I'll give you your money back. Okay. So this is the epigraph. Gretel from A Sudden Clearing. Also, what a good friend Jason is to read this entire book when he's like a working father. Thank you, Jason. But I remember you before you became a story. Sometimes I feel a thorn in my foot where there is no thorn. They tell me, not unkindly, that I should imagine nothing here, but I believe that you are still alive. So this is section 1, collapse. The Prairie Witch. A person can lose everything in an instant. A fortune, a family, the sun. I've had to learn this lesson twice in my life. The first time it happened, I was a 15-year-old fugitive from the home for unwed mothers. The second time, I was a prairie witch, chained to my cot in a cinder block jailhouse. Your second home, the sheriff liked to say. Officially, I do not exist in his West. Nevertheless, it is a crime to pay me a visit. On Black Sunday, before anybody knew to call it Black Sunday, I woke up in the jailhouse to a sound like a freight train tunneling through me, an ear-splitting howl that seemed to shake the stone walls. My body trembled like a husk on the cot. My fingers clawed into the mattress. For those early moments in the dark, I was nothing but the fear of floating off. What had happened to me while I slept? It felt as if a knife had scraped the marrow from my bones. Something vital inside me had liquefied and drained away, and in its place was this new weightlessness, lightness, and wrongness, a blanketing whiteness that ran up my spine and seeped out of my mouth. Bankrupt was the word that rose in my mind and attached itself to my condition. At first, I did not recognize the voice crying out for help as my own. I clamped down on the sound, panicked. I could not afford to lose any more ballast. My numb limbs began to prickle with feeling, pins and needles stitching them back to my brain. It was not a happy reunion. 10 white toes sprouted like mushrooms at the edge of a filthy green blanket, waving to me from the outermost limit of what I could make out. A lantern in the hallway gave off a feeble emerald glow, beyond which the cell plunged into shadow. Now, not even the pain was mine. It came and went like the wind. It drilled through my skin and swallowed the world. I began to remember more about the land beyond this cell, the edgeless prairie. The name of the town where I worked returned to me, Nebraska, southeast of the Sandhills and west of the Platte. We were 4 years into the worst drought that any newcomer to the plains had ever experienced. Other beings kept older diaries. Cord, cottonwood trees told a millennial story written in wavy circles that no politician had cared to read. Congressmen train themselves to think in election cycles, not planetary ones. They see spiking market highs and lows. They forget how to read in circles. Us had been having brownouts for months, plagues of jaws and mandibles. Grasshoppers rattled down on the tractor cabs from hissing clouds. Thousands of rabbits fanned over the plains, chewing through anything green. Winged indigo beetles blew in from God alone knew where. Red sand from Oklahoma and black dirt from Kansas and dove gray earth from the eastern plains of Colorado formed a rolling ceiling of dust above us that flashed with heat lightning. My job returned to me before my name did. Yes, I am the antidote, I learned and remembered. I am a prairie witch. A door swung open onto my life. I could picture my rented room in the boarding house, my poster facing the street from the third-floor window. The antidote of us, now accepting deposits. I advertised my banking services as a panacea for every ailment from heartburn to nightmares. Some of my customers, I recalled, had made up a little jingle about me, taking the lyrics from my poster. Wouldn't it be terrifying if I sang? I've never done that, and I never will. But I like to pause, like maybe. Some writers do. The antidote to lovesickness, the antidote to grief, the antidote to gas pains, the antidote to guilt, the antidote to sleepless nights, the antidote to sweaty palms, the antidote to all regrets, the antidote to shame. Most everyone on the plains knew about us, even those who denied our existence. The vaults, some called us, the prairie witches. And I remembered what I did to earn my bread, what I had been doing since I was a much younger woman, absorbing and storing my customers' memories, banking secrets for the townspeople of us, sins and crimes, first and last times, nights of unspeakable horror and dewdrop blue mornings. Or who knew what my customers had transferred from their bodies into mine? These were only my guesses. I disappear into a spacious blankness during my transfers. A prairie witch's body is a room for rent, a vault, to store the things people cannot stand to know or bear to forget. That's it. Thanks, guys.
Hi. Oh, sorry. Hi. Thank you so much for being here, both of you. I'm a Midwesterner and an anthropology major, so this is like doubly exciting for me. And I remember I found Swamplandia in a little English secondhand bookstore when I was studying abroad in Munich, and it was like this shining, glimmering thing in a store window, and I remember devouring it in a day, and so it had a huge impact on me, and I'm writing an anthropology thesis right now, whatever. But it's a very important book to me, so this is very special. But I wanted to ask you about how you sort of think about your imprint on this book, because in anthropology we think a lot about like reflexivity, and we're not just translation machines, you know, it's not just taking information and copying it onto paper, but how do you sort of see yourself like traced in the book?
I mean, I actually think it's a polyphonic book. They're sort of different point of view characters, so it's multi-voiced. And I think they're, you know, I mean, as my siblings are always encouraging me to say, they're like, that's just part of your demented psyche. You know, like it's like you can't deny that, right? I mean, to the extent that it's sort of possible to like throw your voice as far as you can. But I mean, I do sort of think I wouldn't be able to write any of these people if I didn't have some connection, right, to my own living. Or I mean, I always think like memory and the imagination. I mean, you know, you grow your imaginary worlds out of real bedrock. So I don't know if that's quite an answer. It's not none of it is like, you know, one to one, but I wouldn't have been able to make any of these people live or feel real if I didn't have some I don't know, something to plug into from my own life.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you both for a lovely conversation. It was really delightful and surprisingly not depressing. But
That's such a great blurb for us.
Give us 10 more minutes. We can go real dark if you want it. Yeah.
So while you were talking about soil in the Dust Bowl, I was reminded of the plow that broke the plains. And then I started thinking about, with your conversation, both of you referred to to late stage capitalism. If, I'm sure you both think about the plow that broke the plains as a particular point and a particular perspective. That was 90 years ago, right? It's kind of shocking to think. And I just wondered if you wanted to just kind of speculate, let's have a little speculative fiction about that gap, about how the promise of that moment sort of disappeared, if I'm not leading too much by saying that. So this is actually for both of you.
So The Plow That Broke the Plains is a Pari Lorentz documentary that was really groundbreaking for its time, and is referenced in the book too. He's another kind of funded by the New Deal, by this project. And I think, one of the things about this era is there's a lot of experimentation happening, actually. They're kind of collective farms. There's a soil conservation service that's going around trying to teach people no-till agriculture, other kind of different ways to kind of live with this landscape. I think, just sort of, and this is just, I don't know how Jason feels about it. I mean, some of that kind of, let's get together and have a conversation about how we might make reparations or restitutions or reorder things here. I do wonder if there might be some more willingness to reconsider how we live and feed and transport ourselves right now in proportion to how many people seem to really have this shared awareness that we have to make a change. Let's hope, right? I know. I mean, I will tell you one hopeful thing is I spoke to someone in Oregon who does a lot of work with ranchers who don't, she couldn't be more distant from them politically. And she said because they are the ones who are first affected by when the supply chain fails, there's like a new willingness, actually, just practically. They're like, okay, fine, let's try to communally graze. Let's actually think about something like water not as a commodity. Let's think about how we can repair watersheds. Let's put more organic matter in the soil. And it's sort of born out of necessity or desperation in a way. But like there's a different willingness to kind of reconceive of property. I don't really know. I feel like it depends on the day that, but I think sometimes hopelessness feels like really evasive too, right? I don't know if that's a good answer. But I think the Pari Lorentz documentary, if you go back to one of the things that I do think a lot of understandings of what caused this ecological crisis that is ongoing, I think colonial violence really is omitted. It certainly was from my original understanding, It was almost like, well, that is like some parallel or prior atrocity safely in the past, and that was tragic but inevitable. And so I think a lot of this book for me was trying to unsettle that narrative, because you sort of also see, right, like where we are repeating that history now. I think there's still huge portions of where it's like sacrificial lands and sacrificial people, and that extraction continues, the costs are borne so disproportionately. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's interesting times we're living in, right? It's like, I don't want to live in interesting times anymore.
I know, the siren was I was like, shout over the siren.
It does feel like right now, too, that we're being forced to open our eyes and look at all this stuff that it's always been. It feels like, what's the Roddy Piper, them, right? Whereas you put the glasses on and you're like, oh shit, like that's actually what's happening. It reminds in 2016, so I have a lot of me and my friends are all dumbasses. I'm like the only one that gets paid to they give me a lot of shit because we're all I'm a brown redneck, kind of thing, and I grew up pretty apolitical, and most of my friends are still in that kind of space, but they're slowly coming around to certain things. And I'll never forget, after 2016, I had a buddy of mine, this good old boy in Florida. He calls me and he goes, man, day after the election, they attacked my neighbor who's Muslim. He's like, there's a lot of racism in America, man. I just thought you were making all that shit up because you're just a liberal professor. He's like, but no, I think it's like a real thing. And I was like, yeah, kind of, and I feel like we're getting there. It was like, oh.
It is like the 3D glasses.
Yeah.
We're more, they're like, they're just handing them out to more.
And so I think, I think part of it is there is this awakening that's going to force a rethinking of what the collective is and who we are as a society. And, my friend Emily Lindsay, who works at the La Brea Tar Pits, I saw an interview that she did last year they did this analysis of the impacts of humans on the LA basin and the introduction of fire when humans sort of arrive. And in this interview that she did, she said something like, it stuck with me. She said, this is a good way, we can look at the kind of deep history of human impacts on this environment, and it's maybe a moment for us to now think about how we are going to live with climate change. And I thought that wording, it wasn't like, how are we going to stop climate change? What are we going to do? It's like, how are we going to now live in this new moment? And that shift, I think, was a it's a very important one, and I think is really speaks to. I mean, I am positive. I'm very. I try to be really optimistic about all this stuff, and I think things are about to get a lot worse. But then I also think that they have to get worse before they can get better. And part of it is this, a new language for being able to talk about this stuff, and a new kind of understanding that we're all in this together, and we're going to have to, have to sit down with the pen and paper and figure out what we're going to do. So I try to be hopeful about this moment as much as I possibly can.
Last question for tonight.
I'm a big fan of your short fiction, and I really look forward to reading the novel. And I was struck by what you said about Little House on the Prairie and how the dugouts, that the European settlers weren't the first to come up with the idea, because my Swedish great-grandparents did this, and it never occurred to me that, of course, Native peoples probably figured that out first until this moment, I must say, with great embarrassment. But in addition to thinking about children's literature like Little House on the Prairie, which I grew up with as well, I hear The Wizard of Oz being referenced there with Uz and other things. And this is a Wizard of Oz moment with Wicked being so popular. What are your thoughts on that kind of American, I don't know what to call it, it's a fable or way of looking at things, and how that feeds into our collective consciousness, maybe?
Yeah. No, thank you for this question. I have one of my sweet friends in Portland, when I told her about this book, was like, yeah, that's the zeitgeist, Karen. You're right to capitalize on Wicked. And I was like, I have been writing this book for thousands of years. And even if I was reaching for a zeitgeist, like by the time I got there, like, well, I'll be holograms. Like I'm like, even if I was trying very hard, like, I don't know what to say about that. But I also feel a little embarrassed about this to admit, Uz is like the name of the town in the book of Job, which I realize is not like the tip of the tongue for all people. And you can't write, this book has like these women called prairie witches who store memories from people. There's like dust cyclones. I wouldn't deny that I saw the movie, and I'm sure it imprinted me as it imprints every scalded child who sees it. And David Lynch, I learned, so I mention him now. I'm like, see, me and David Lynch were impacted. But it wasn't really like it's interesting because I've read a lot of reviews that say, oh, it's an allegory, or that's the lens that this book is interpreted through. And that really wasn't a conscious, I didn't feel like this book was consciously attempting to be kind of in conversation with the Wizard of Oz quite in that way. I think all people who watch that movie, like the idea of like looking behind the curtain. It's just so in the weave of everybody's imagination. I think influence is mysterious that way too. So I wouldn't deny it, but I would just say, like, I think the Book of Job was sort of the text that this book was more consciously in conversation with. And I don't know, my brother just had a baby and named her Dorothy Russell. So I feel like I'm like, okay, yes, fine, the Wizard of Oz, fine. Like, I don't like, he was influenced too. I I guess that was it, guys. Thank
Okay,
you so
thank
much
you.
for coming.
Get the book. It's wonderful.
That's where the flying monkeys are like, cue 'em. Like, I don't know.
Thank you all for being here. Thank you guys so much, really. Thank you. And thank you for reading when I asked you to. Thank you, and see you all in May when we have more spring programs. And thank you all for being here this evening. Take care. Bye.